Okay, so I can already see a few familiar faces and a few new faces. So hello to those that have attended our Architect Exchange forum before. And welcome to the new ones. Thanks for joining. A small bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session today, so it will end up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So feel free to ask any questions or pop any questions or comments in the chat. Okay, a little bit about myself. Even though I've been talking, then half you probably know me. So I'm Chris O'Brien, nickname Carb, but obviously my initial, so everyone calls me Carb, whether it's industry or wherever. Pretty easy really. But yeah, so I've worked in IT development and networking in IT before I actually joined IT recruitment. So I've got a little bit of knowledge of IT, a claim to stay really. So I've transitioned to IT recruitment for my sins. 20 years later, I specialise in advising candidates, clients, partnerships, and in our solutions area as well, here at Crimson. So my actual title these days is Head of Customer Engagement, quite a fancy title. So it's pretty much everything really. But I've spent, according to LinkedIn, yesterday, I spent 17 years at Crimson yesterday. So it's pretty much half my life. It's pretty crazy really, but really good. It's a great company, and you probably know actually that, as few of you know, that we got brought out a few years ago recently by Harvey Nash, and now they're called, rebranded to Nash Squared. So which brings on to new slide. So Crimson were established in 2001. We're now two decades old. We're IT recruitment specialists. We're also Microsoft Gold partners. We're part of a 1 billion brand global company. We've got, it does say on the slide, 190 plus clients UK wide, but I know actually we've got more than 200. We've got revenues of 21 million. We invested heavily, over £1 million in our CRM Dynamics recruitment solution, which works wonders. So yeah, we're still investing in it right now actually as we're going, because we need to really for the market and for our customers. So Architect Exchange, it's been going for quite some years now, and it's been a bit different the last couple of years. Obviously we've got a couple of virtual ones, been a bit of a pause because of COVID as well. But historically we've had things like pizzas, beers and coffees and all that sort of stuff, and cakes, and we've sat in a room for 1-2 hours in London, Birmingham, Manchester, and shared ideas, blue sky thinking, and some great speakers. Which brings me on to today, which we've got two fantastic speakers. But before I do want to talk about the speakers, I was going to mention, if you want to write in the chat, first of all, what your name is, what your job title is, and maybe the reason why you've joined the forum. If there's anything you want to, maybe just join because, as Austin said, he's at a loose end, so he's got an hour to spare. But maybe, you saw the title, you saw, data fabric, architecture, and you thought maybe it might be worth picking something up new. If you want to put that in the chat and, your title, then that'll be fantastic as well. A bit of an introduction will be fantastic. So going on to the speakers, I'll probably release this share now and Stephen can take over. But the first speaker, we've Crimson partnered up with a great company called Alumni Services, who are a global brand. So we work with them UK, and also Stephen, who's there, he's actually dialed in from Singapore. So Stephen's the CTO there. I won't go into a spiel of Stephen because he can do it himself. And also we've got Daryl as well, who's the UK director, heads up the UK on digital transformation. And Daryl, I'll want to steal your thunder as well. So I'll hand you over to the wonderful speakers, Stephen and Daryl.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to just share my screen. Everyone. There we go. So while this comes up, so I can't actually see the chat and everything. So Daryl will hopefully keep an eye on that while I'm talking, and then the other way around while he's talking. A poll's going to come up in a moment, really just to get everyone's brains going a little bit and start thinking about what this data fabric thing is and the whole data conversation. It is quite a short period of time that we've got to talk, so we're not going to go into massive in-depth technical stuff around data fabric. It's kind of an introduction to kind of what should we be looking at and what as a group should our next steps be. So I hope you guys find it interesting. thanks, Chris, for the introduction. As you can hear, I'm from South Africa, so please don't hold it against me that we beat you in rugby all the time. Yeah, I've been living in Singapore for just over 2 years, and one of the founders of Alumni Services. Not sure if the poll has come up yet. There we go. That. Right.
So just to make you aware, I think the 3 polls are in the chat already, Stephen.
Oh, okay, fantastic. All
yeah,
right.
with the results coming through.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. All right. So with that in mind, I'll kick off, and while you continue to answer the polls. So so data. So a bit of humor to start. So data really is actually like food, right? If you bring it up at a party, everyone's got an opinion, right? Everyone's consuming data. Everyone thinks they know how to cook data, so to speak. Many people think they're the proverbial master chef of data, right? When you have that conversation. But how do we change the discussion from a master chef type discussion, where there's this fantastical application of machine learning, or this data theft story that happened, to more of a Cordon Bleu Michelin star experience? For me, that's up to us, all of us in this call. It's our responsibility to be the 3-hatted chefs of data, rather than just Britain's best baker. So today, everyone is talking about AI and ML. I bet you all have an opinion on it. Thank goodness, big data is now a bit more of a tasty roast chicken than the main discussion point. And while AI and ML are critical, they're really more the cherry on the top, or the basil gel, so to speak. Without the main course to support the fancy bits, well, it's not quite Michelin star. It's not actually quite anything. So what is this main course? For me, that is our data architecture, and more specifically, the data architecture of the future. Today, a lot of our data architectures are largely monolithic, actually, similar to the application architectures of 20 years ago that we've spent the last 20 years unpicking. So that leads us to the conversation around data fabric and data meshes, which is what we're going to get into today. But why? Like, why are we even having this conversation? Hopefully we'll enlighten you a little bit, but Forrester suggests that a data fabric will increase return on investment through data by over 450%. They say that it'll unlock $6 million worth of business benefit on average. It'll accelerate data delivery by 60 times, and it will improve customer affinity analysis by 20 times. I mean, those are some pretty broad suggestions by Forrester, but I suppose they're pretty reputable. And hopefully over the next 30 minutes, we'll start to see what that's all about. But for me, actually, it's a bit different. For me, it's a very simple question. How do we make data a product on the balance sheet that actually adds value to our organization?
Okay, thank you, Stephen, for posing that question. So I'm going to look at this first of all from a kind of the business angle before Stephen starts to talk about the kind of the architectures. And we all know today that businesses face a broad range of challenges. And I've listed 3 here, which we see across a kind of a broad range of sectors based on what's happening in today's world. So there's things such as obviously the Ukraine war, there's Brexit, there's post-COVID, which are kind of generally kind of increasing these type of challenges within the business. First of all, we've got increased costs. The cost of raw materials and their transportation is rapidly increasing. It's really important that businesses understand the total ecosystem to realise how costs can be brought under control. For example, analysing the removal of waste through kind of accurate data analysis. Secondly, and linked to that, we have supply chain issues. You know, Brexit in particular in the UK. I know that won't be relevant so much in Singapore, Stephen, but Brexit in particular has introduced a different way of trading with our EU partners and with the rest of the world. You know, so greater transparency across the supply chain can help businesses mitigate the problems. And the final one I've picked out because, you know, it's extremely relevant. One of the reasons why we're not, Chris, on your kind of roof terrace enjoying the beers and the pizza, you know, is increased levels of remote working. You know, I don't know about everybody else on the call, but certainly when I'm dealing with businesses, you know, particularly local government and some service industries, I'm constantly waiting longer and longer for businesses to complete basic service functions. And often that's due to operational people working from home and not having access to the information they need or the support that they require from the different parts of the organisation. And, you know, and at Alumni, we're kind of really passionate that kind of data insights are a vital ingredient. There we go, food relationship again. Didn't tackle these problems. You know, it can help us model real world activity. You know, secondly, it can help us in kind of key decision making. And thirdly, it can help kind of improve our networking and communication and the ease of which kind of data and information flows across an organisation. And it's interesting actually looking into one of the poll results where we said, you know, is decision making based on data within your organisation? That the vast majority of people are saying that, you know, some decisions are based on data analytics. But the important thing here is that, you know, there's not many people saying that their key business decisions are based on data. And in today's world, with the challenges we face, you know, that's certainly something we're going to have to start to address. So, Steve, if we move on to the next slide, we can have a quick look at what the analysts are saying to us. You know, I won't go through all of these verbatim, but you can see generally, and sorry, a lot of them are American in terms of the quotes, but you can see generally across the analyst community, the focus and importance of data is becoming increasingly prevalent. You know, so a 10% increase in data visibility could result in a $65 million additional income. You know, so the kind of the disproportionate impact of data here is relevant, and certainly relevant within some of the engagements that we've had. The biggest issue with data access is IT budget constraints. You know, one of the things certainly I've experienced in terms of the engagements that we've had is that data transformation is a cultural transformation as well as a technology transformation. And I know we're going to be talking about architecture here, but it's key that the business as a whole adopts the view that data is a critical asset for the business and that we must build our technology roadmaps around data really to make that to work. And, you know, and that requires investment. You know, 73% of data goes unused for analytics purposes. I think, again, we'll look in terms of, as Steve kind of gives us the overview of kind of monolithic data approaches, maybe some of the reasons why that is the case and why people don't have access, and the vast majority of data that we have access to goes unused. And finally, poor data costs the US a lot of money, $3.1 trillion a year. You know, certainly in my initial forays with data a few years back in a large UK telco, we were faced with having a great data engine, great architecture, great tools, but unfortunately, the integrity of the data in that was an issue. So finally, Steve, if we go on to why from a business point of view, and going back to Stephen's initial food analogy about Michelin star. Having seen that, I decided to go and look at, what do those Michelin star judges look for in terms of criteria in restaurants, and how would that map onto data solutions? So first criteria, quality. So quality of the products, same with the quality of the data that we've just discussed. Mastery of flavour and cooking techniques. Again, that aligns to mastery and flexibility of the data analysis. The personality of the chef, was an interesting one, but what that does highlight is the importance of people within this environment. Having the right skilled resources, working with the architectures that Steve has just described, and that's right across, business analysts, data scientists, data engineers, all of which can deliver that high return on investment, which aligns with the value for money for the Michelin star. And then finally, the consistency between visits. For me, that's all about kind of data integrity. It's important that as we deliver these architectures and these data solutions, that we create insights that people genuinely believe in and are not trying to kind of pick holes in the data that has led to those insights. So, Stephen, that's a little bit of an overview of why businesses should be taking this seriously and what we'd be looking for. Maybe you can run through some of your thoughts on data architectures.
Cool. Thanks, Daryl. So, I mean, all of us here know that architecture is not just about technology. And I think as we move from where we are with data today, and we move from this kind of monolithic thinking where we've been talking about data lakes for ages, big data, now some of us starting to speak about small data, but what we need to realize and what we need to help our businesses with is that actually the concept of a data mesh or a data fabric actually has nothing to do with technology. All right, it's got a lot to do with how we think about data, how we work with data, how we value data, those sorts of things. Simplifying data into something understandable and consumable is one of the problems that we've always struggled with, and Daryl's spoken about it already. There's been this ongoing debate of whether we deal with data as a domain-driven architecture or a canonical data architecture, and I think since the beginning of data, there's been two camps and we've argued about it. I think part of the reason for this is that we all have an ingrained monolithic mentality, right? We have this, we'll bring it together and this is where we'll go, and then it's easy to think about and easy to manage. But data actually mirrors the real world, right? So a canonical data model does make sense, but only for a given domain. So then where are we? If our domain is the whole world, we're kind of back to square one of this argument between domain-driven data or canonical. It's in the cloud, it's in applications, it's in a data lake, it's in Excel documents, it's in a stream. IBM reports that 82% of enterprises today are inhibited by their data silos. That's a huge number. So what do we do? Well, at the moment, we go, right, we'll just pull it all into a data lake. We'll create some ETLs, we'll create some pipelines, we might have some APIs, we'll put it all into this massive data lake using all of these cool processes. Sounds pretty monolithic, but actually it also sounds fairly reasonable to our minds. This then explodes out of our monolith as everyone tries to use the data again. So every Susie, Jane, and Harriet that's trying to get data, they retransform it, they have a bucket load, more ETLs, more pipelines, more APIs, and we just end up with really quite a bit of a mess. And this obviously affects the quality. This affects reliability. All of the things that Daryl mentioned in the previous slide suddenly become a real problem for us. So having learned our lessons with monoliths over the last 20 years in applications, we can probably say that this is not such a reasonable approach. Having a centralized architecture, hyper-specialized delivery, high-cost individuals like data scientists that we need, very rare individuals like data analysts, data engineers, and then a very disconnected execution. It's not really something that inspires us to trust our data and to create value out of it. So what next? Well, we have to address this from a business architecture and an information architecture perspective. So those of you that have read or watched anything on data meshes, this concept will probably resonate with you, and some of the things that have just come on the screen are probably things that you're nodding your head at. For those of you that are more familiar with the data fabric concept, that's really about data, application, and technology architectures. So for the die-hard enterprise architects in the room, we really are addressing it across our BIDAT model, for want of an architectural term. So let's start with the business and information perspective. Here we start with decentralized data domains. So we spoke about data domains earlier, and if we had to decentralize those data domains, and that allows us to decentralize the governance of those data domains. Again, this seems like a great idea, but this can exacerbate the data problem actually. So technically, decentralized data can hinder the realization of value because discovery, understanding, trust, and ultimately using high quality data can be compromised. Essentially, our data has the potential to become lost, forgotten, or what Gartner refers to as dark data. And dark data has completely lost its value. The purpose of the data fabric is to, at its heart, create an environment for data integration, facilitating data self-service, and eventually deterministic data linking. It's quite an important point, that deterministic data linking, and we'll get into it a little bit later at a high level. A robust data fabric architecture reduces the separation between the operational data plane, which is typically your OLTP type data, and the analytical data plane. So you can imagine on my image on the top left, all those ETL pipes and the data pipelines start to disappear, and the blue analytical data plane starts to shift and merge over the yellow operational data plane. This enables data to be used across planes while housed within the data domains. But it does mean we have to mobilize the data. So how do we mobilize data? Well, some really good reference architectures for mobilizing data, and I'm not going to go into them now, but definitely worth looking at is look at Lambda architectures, Kappa architectures, Zeta architectures, for those of you who are American, I guess, or Zeta, I don't know. But really good data mobilization. And as we do that, what it allows us to do is reduce the segregation between that operational data plane and the analytical data plane. So that's all pretty confusing, right? If this wonderful mix is to be what makes us the next three-hatted restaurant or the next three-hatted chefs, we better get clear on what the ingredients are and how we're going to cook this goose, because it's not super simple. I'm not going to call out everything on this slide. There's loads of articles, there's loads of great YouTube channels that you can look for, and they'll probably do a much better job of me at describing it to you and making sure you really understand it. But it is critical that we do know what are the ingredients that we need from a tech perspective, and what do we need to do to enable organizational change, because without change, well, the best tech in the world is irrelevant. So a couple of really key highlights that you need to focus on through this. The first one is metadata. So Ian raised a really good point about people not understanding data about their processes, which means that they don't understand their productivity. The problem with that is typically today our metadata is passive. So passive metadata really just tells us something about the data. That's it. What we need to do is we need to be able to identify and connect with the data and analyze it. And that needs 4 different types of metadata. So technical metadata, that's what we have today, right? It just tells us something about the data. Business metadata. So business metadata really tells us something about how business is impacted by the data. And I'm simplifying it, but fundamentally that's what it is. Operational data, metadata, this tells us what is being done to the data and why it is being done to the data. And social metadata is telling us how end users are impacting the content of that data. This is quite a different way of thinking about data and about how we classify data. The last 3 of these, business, operational, and social, these are the 3 that we need to get us to active metadata. So that it's not just about defining it, but about what happens to the data and what is done to the data. When we understand that, what it allows us to do is to create a metadata graph. So active metadata is critical to the data fabric because of this active metadata graph. And the reason it's critical is for 5 specific things that it enables, all of which talk to Ian's point. It improves the context of metadata powering data discovery. Okay, so what that means is we don't have to discover data through manual interrogation or through intense knowledge like a data analyst would have. We can automatically enable data discovery using metadata and machine learning models to identify it. We can auto-generate data quality and lineage impacts. So if there is missing data, if there is outlying data, if there is some strange standard deviation to the data, all of those things can start to be picked up and analyzed automatically because of this additional type of metadata that we have about the data. We can also start using the active metadata to fill in those gaps. So we all know that synthetic data is becoming a bigger and bigger and a more important piece to our lives, especially for those of us working in machine learning and artificial intelligence. How do we create synthetic data accurately? Well, this is a huge part of it. High quality and lineage impact. The third is probably something that everyone is really worried about, and that is the sensitivity of data. Sensitive data in GDPR, whatever it might be. Every country is getting more and more strict on their regulations. And if we have distributed data domains with fairly ubiquitous access, does that mean everyone has access to everything? Well, the simple answer is no. If we have the right active metadata in place, what it allows us to do is automatically start classifying that data, automatically use masking on sensitive data, and it drastically improves the ability to do easy distributed governance and compliance. Now, I can't overemphasize this because the first thing that will stymie any data project is if you have a risk and compliance officer and highly sensitive personal information that you guys store, in which case they'll just shut it down and put you into probably 8 months of review before you can do anything. So this is a super critical piece to overcoming that obstacle. Then it actually gets to using the data ourselves rather than all this auto-generated stuff. So making embedded collaboration possible. What this is about is enabling the different role players of data to be able to use data how they want to use it. So too often today, if you need to use data out of a platform, you have to use it in the way that the platform wants to give it to you. So very simply, there's an API, you've got to call an API to get it. You've got a consumer listening to a stream that picks up data. You've got an ETL process that receives data from a file or a queue or whatever it might be. But different role players in the data world want to use it differently. Data scientists, data analysts, executives wanting to do data, look at a dashboard. All of these people need to look at data differently and want to consume it in different ways. And what a data fabric does is it enables us to do that simply by us knowing how data is manipulated and what is done to it through our active metadata. The last one is the orchestration of metadata across platforms. So what we are definitely not suggesting is that now we create a different type of monolith, which is actually just a monolith of which we're calling a data fabric. That's definitely not what it is. What a data fabric really is that data can live in all of these different places. You know, transactional data can live in the transactional systems for which the data belongs. Master data can live maybe somewhere specific to an organization. Maybe we have a new type of data classification called transactional master data. It's just a random name. I don't know if it'll stick, where transactions are creating data that is then relevant to many other applications across the fabric. So how does that all work? Well, this metadata allows us to manage data, understand data, and trust data in a way that it can be made available to all of the platform itself, and across the different the platforms of the fabric. The third thing that we need to really understand is once we've got active metadata, that leads us to another type of graph. So we spoke about a metadata graph. The second type of graph is a knowledge graph. So again, I'm sure most of you have had some tinkling with a graph database by now. Anyone that's tried to do any work with the back end of Microsoft 365 or Azure knows that most of it's run using their graph database. Why is a knowledge graph important? Because it's a network. It is essentially the network that can become our fabric. So network as opposed to monolith, everything sits separate to each other. We have objects, we have events, we have situations, we even have concepts, these nebulous things. And importantly, we have the relationships between all of them. It's those relationships which help us understand and give knowledge to the individual items. An object is only an object until we know how it interacts with the outside world, until we know how events or situations affect and change that object, or until we know how concepts can change the ultimate value of the object. And so therefore, knowledge graphs are a key component that we need to get into in understanding how to implement a data fabric and a data mesh. So again, those are some pretty deep concepts, but let's simplify it really back. What can we do today? Because this stuff, according to Gartner, is on the 5-year trajectory still. Some of us are going to be playing with it today, but it's only going to become mainstream, maybe dip into the trough of disillusionment and then come out of it in the next 4 to 5 years, realistically. But what can we do today to prepare ourselves and our organizations for that eventuality?
Okay. Thank you, Steve. A bit of an echo there. If somebody could go on mute. There we go. Great. So before I just go quickly into the next steps, because we didn't have a chance to look at the poll results at the start. People kind of look at these in the chat. So in terms of who owns data strategy in your organization, fairly even distribution here, with around 50% saying that the chief digital or data officer. I must admit we didn't define what CDO meant, and it can mean 2 different things in different organizations. But then we had a quarter of the respondees in IT and a quarter in the business units. And so it's fair to say that, when we look across businesses, that certainly the ownership of the data is not necessarily consistent. And it doesn't really matter, in all honesty, where the data strategy is owned, but it's really about the kind of the buy-in from the whole business and how the kind of the people who are owning it, what control and influence they have over the rest of the organization. But it's interesting to see that split. We've already covered to an extent, is data used in decision making in your organization? Quite pleasing to see that no respondee said data is not used for decision making, which is quite reassuring. But it is interesting to see that more people have said that decisions are made based on anecdotal use of data than actually where key decisions are made based on data analytics. Certainly I've had a lot of experience where people quote figures that have come from reports which are highly dubious, not fact checked, and kind of key business decisions are made on those. And I think what Stephen's just described is effectively an environment we can create where we can really move away from that type of practice. But the vast majority of people are saying that we're already on that journey. Some businesses are making some decisions, based on data analytics. And then finally, does your organization currently have a data strategy roadmap? This one surprised me, to be honest, to find out that, it's almost like exactly a quarter for each answer. So, a quarter have said yes, a quarter have said no, a quarter have said we have one, but it's based in the kind of the IT roadmaps. And then, a quarter of the people, or a fifth of the people, I should say, said it's embedded into other strategies and roadmaps, i.e. the focus isn't on data, but data is maybe seen as an enabler or a supporter for that. So, in terms of next steps, as architects within the business, architects are key to helping create the vision and roadmap required to unlock the potential of data. And business leaders could well be very skeptical at this point. Many will have been involved in a process previously where potentially have invested already in a data solution. Maybe, hit some of the problems that Stephen's described about some of the kind of the drawbacks of a monolithic structure, and it hasn't delivered on the ROI. So, business leaders are going to be skeptical, but the next steps for any organization are going to be based on where you currently are in terms of your maturity around data management. And to repeat what I said earlier, the key is that the transformation is required is both cultural and architectural, and that every part of the organization needs to be involved. And we believe that plotting your way, away from the monolithic thinking is key, and data fabric solutions offer a way to unlock the true potential of data within the organization. So thank you to listening to myself and Stephen as we've gone through that. Maybe if we just go on to the next slide, Stephen. Yeah, just a couple of minutes about Alumni Services, which is where both Stephen and I work. As Chris, or Cobb, as I know most people call him, mentioned at the beginning, we are a global organisation in that we are headquartered in Singapore with offices in Hong Kong, obviously an office in the UK, and shortly about to open an office in Australia. So we are a global organisation of around 40 consultants at the moment, and we specialise in digital transformation. And certainly, working with businesses to help them through their transformation journey to the type of data architectures that Stephen has just described is key to us. And as well as the architectural element, we focus really heavily on business and people change management that go alongside that. And you can see there the kind of the plethora of kind of logos and businesses that we're already working with. Okay, so next slide, Stephen, which I think is just our beautiful pictures and contact details. So there you'll see myself and Stephen. Feel free to contact either of us after this session about any questions that you may have. Okay, thank you, Chris. I guess back to you.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks very much. Really appreciate that. That was really good. Very insightful. I know more about data mesh and fabrics than I did before. I was really getting into it as well. So if anybody else has got any questions to kind of bring to the floor, really, for Darryl and Steve, who I've explained all that data that was going on there and all the Michelin star stuff and, you know, and all the ingredients. It was a good analogy, actually. It was good to go back into it as well, which was sometimes when you make analogies like that, it makes it a bit more real, doesn't it? You know, because it's
Made me hungry.
yeah, likewise, actually. But if anyone's got any questions, please to the floor to both Stephen and Darryl, then yeah, please either come on camera or just put them in the chat, really. This is the awkward part, isn't it, where people are a bit shy, you know, or they literally just took a whole lot of brain dumping. Yes, any questions, guys? Shoba's normally got a question because she's quite passionate about data, so I'm really surprised that she hasn't said anything.
Hi, will you be able to send this recorded video to the participants so that we can come back to you with any questions after going through it again?
Yeah, no problem at all. No problem with that. I'm sure that's obviously up to Stephen and Darryl as well, but I've got no problem with that at all to escalate a question over for a response.
Thank you.
So there's a question around the distributed data governance. Is this the future direction? As my understanding is, having a centralized data domain governance will keep consistency across the metadata. So it's a great question. The idea here with decentralized governance is very much the fact that the right people to govern data are the people with the most knowledge about the data. And if we have a distributed data domain, that would indicate that the right people to govern the data of the domain would be the domain itself. And they would then govern that data. The concept of the metadata is actually not something that you need to build consistency in, because if you have active metadata, actually what happens is you start using ML models to govern the metadata. So the metadata is not a human managed thing. As long as your governance structure is correct within the distributed data domain, what happens is the models start to understand how the data is moving and being used, and starts to automatically associate different metadata elements with the data itself. I hope that answers your question. It's quite a nebulous topic, and I'm happy to go into more detail about it, but I hope that quite quickly answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. I have another quick query regarding the operational metadata. I know it's pretty critical part. Even in my organization, I'm seeing a bit of gap in that of what is the best way to capture. So because it's again person dependent who can provide that information and all that, and what's the best way to initiate the capture of that, and are there any tools? Because I know there are metadata catalog tools and other things, but this is a vast thing where we need to, it's a big initiative. I thought like how to get that. So any suggestions or directions related to that?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the big players are trying to bring out data fabric tools, right? You'll see IBM have one, TIBCO have one. There's loads of big data fabric tools out there. And a lot of what they do is they claim to do things around active metadata. It's too early to tell how good they are and the maturity of them. It's still very, very early in this journey. Are those tools the right way to go, or is that just using some sort of a tool to create a silo for metadata? I don't know the answer. How do we go about identifying the metadata? Well, part of that starts with our governance. Like, what are the key governance factors that we want to look at? And part of that starts looking at how to build models to identify metadata itself. So I'm working actually with an amazing lady in South Africa on machine learning on how to look at metadata and how to identify it, and using it for things like, you know, if you have a central email box and you have 1 trillion emails come in, how do you use not just contextual awareness of what's in the email, but how do you use where is it coming from, what is the context of it, what type of data is it, and then use that to route the email or to do something. I mean, it's a simple example, but you know, it's not necessarily a tool. It's not necessarily something where we have to individually identify the metadata. It's part of this whole thing that we have to figure out. So I know that's not a clear answer, but it is new, it's a new topic, and I think it's up to us as architects to figure it out and to help drive the right behavior of the organizations of the future.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think because the business, operational, and social, they're pretty critical things in the coming world for the organization, and definitely we need to look into the best ways to capture that. Like you mentioned, creating a model for capturing that is the critical thing, I would say. Definitely.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Hi guys, it's Dave Roop here, Steve. So one question for me is the different methods or ways to extract and analyze data, such as ETL, data cleansing, APIs. They have been with us for a while, and there are so many companies who have made so much of money, right? There are hundreds of tools on it. Will this metadata concept, if it takes off in the next 3, 4, 5 years, will it mean that all that world will come to an end, or you think they'll evolve in a certain different way and adopt, or it will just be a sad death to that big revenue stream of so many companies?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think it's a personal, this would be my personal review on it. I think data is changing, and if we already look at some of the old data management tools, the kind of the old BizTalks of the world, or the old TIPCO engines of the world, the MQs, they're already changing, right? Although the names might not have changed, the way that they handle data and deal with data is already changing quite dramatically. So I don't know. I think a lot of these companies have very clever people working for them. I'm sure some of you guys are working for them, and they will start looking at how to change these protocols. You know, will ETL disappear completely? I don't think so. I think there will always be some element of ETL there. Will APIs disappear completely? No, because you know, not everyone is going to have consumers consuming of live streams all the time. Like it's, so I think it's not about replacing one thing with another. It's about understanding what is involved in the fabric and how do we use it and where do we use it and how do we consume things in different ways. Like sometimes I might want to consume data using an API. Sometimes I might want to consume it using a consumer of a stream. It's the same data. I'm just consuming it in a different way for a different purpose. So yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily going to push, you know, some of these technologies into oblivion. I think it's more just about what is the right thing where, and we will see an evolution over time. Again, that's just my opinion. I don't know. Someone else might have an opinion that they want to share.
Got it. Thanks for this.
I was going to say we had a couple of questions as well on the chat, didn't we? We had one from Shoba in terms of how many professional services firms do you work with? It just so happens I'm sitting in the office of one at the moment, so can I say at least one? But partnerships are very difficult to manage data, and I do completely understand that. You know, when you're working across kind of organizational boundaries, you know, having a kind of a holistic data strategy is very difficult. However, I do firmly believe that, you know, part of those challenges lie in the fact that most businesses have the monolithic approach that Stephen's spoken about already. And certainly, you know, with data fabric, it will architecturally enable what we want to achieve. However, I think what we do need to do, and I think this comes down to Vipul's question a little bit later on, we need some kind of rules engine, business logic engine to understand kind of visibility of data and what, you know, because compliance comes into this as well. And Stephen, you know, I'm sure there's probably some kind of business logic layer or rules engine layer within the architecture that we need to address as well, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if that is a rules engine or a business logic engine like we've known it historically, or if it's something new, but by the same name, again, it's part of our job to start looking at what that is. But yes, it's not all going to be, simple. Here's the data. We understand everything. We are still going to have to apply logic to it. We are still going to have to apply some element of enrichment to it. And that can happen in a various plethora of ways. Like it could happen through a logic engine. It could happen through some sort of enrichment protocol. It could happen through all sorts of different things. It's hard to say where we're going to be in the future, but yes, one thing we know is that it's not just the data layer is not just about data transportation and data storage. There are many facets to it. I think the question of schemas comes up, and how do we manage data schemas, and how does the schema change, and how that becomes a very interesting topic. It's another great question that we have to answer. Luckily, technologies like streaming technologies help us manage streaming. Help us manage schemas. So already we're starting to see technologies assist in that. Yeah, I think it's an interesting place to be talking. Just to talk to Ian's question on how do you drive business engagement to see data as a first-class citizen and take domain data ownership. That's about understanding the value of data. So define why data is valuable to the organization. That's what we found. Working, and again, this talks to the question of how many professional services firms that we work to. So a lot of the big professional consultancies, the top 4, top 6 strategic consultancies, often don't have the deep data skills. And we do work for pretty much all of them when they need specific help on this. And what we see is we go and speak to the executive level, the senior management level, and we say to them, guys, everyone's talking about data. Why is it valuable to you? And they go, oh, because it's going to make us more efficient. How? Specifically, let's get specific. Why is it actually valuable to you? And that is a really important question. And if they answer that, they get behind the idea of it. And then if they answer that and you say, okay, cool, would you be prepared to own this? Like, own this data. It's not about, you might live in finance, or you might live in contracts, or you might live in HR, or you might live in, but are you prepared to own this data because it's valuable? And if they are, then they're like, hey, this is now exciting stuff, right? And then they own the data. They don't own the processes that create the data, and they don't care. It's about the data. They own it. It's theirs. They can reference it on their balance sheet or on their P&L or whatever, and that becomes really an interesting conversation to have. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
I was just going to add one to that as well, Stephen, as well, about just kind of pragmatism, because, we both know some of the organizations we've worked with, it is a case of identifying that real world business problem that can be solved with data, and actually just kind of putting together a kind of an early adopter kind of stage to kind of pull together an answer to that problem using data, because there's no better way of promoting the importance of data than actually delivering something that solves a business problem and doing it quickly. So I'd always encourage take a small bite from a real business problem and solve it using data, and you'll be surprised how the importance of data within that organization kind of accelerates. I think that's probably us for time, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I was just about to say it's really good. It's really good and really insightful. Really was. And there's people that stayed in the call right to the wire as well, which is really good because it means they're committed and they took a lot in. There's a lot of great questions as well. I was going to mention, I think Harley has as well. If you've got any remaining questions, please chuck it in the Architect Exchange group forum, which is also on LinkedIn, which the link's there. I'm going to post it as well, so it's there as well. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to quickly share, because I know people might be stuck for time. It's getting to 2 o'clock and people might be hungry as well. So I'm going to quickly just go onto my PowerPoint Live. Here we go. I don't know if you... Actually, I think Stephen or Darren might have control. If you guys can just move over to the slide, that'd be fantastic. I just want to get the last couple of slides, for which is the QR codes, basically. Yeah, the polls just happened, which this is the one. So just wrapping up, obviously people done the poll then, which is great. A bit of feedback on the event, which is always good. But this one in particular, I know Alumni Services have gone into what they do as well, digital transformation, with a lot of great companies there. Also, Crimson, we held the event as well, you know, along with alumni speakers. So there's some QR codes here, some events. There's a QR code for events for Crimson, LinkedIn, news. There's technical recruitment and jobs. So if you do need any resources or you do need any advice around new resources, contractors, market analysis, anything like that, just use that QR code or contact myself or anybody else at Crimson. So, and also there's some CV and salary advice as well, which is our 2022 salary advice there. So which is quite in depth as well. We've got many events, so as well coming up in the year, we will have many more. So always use these QR codes if you can, or the links saving your favourites, and hopefully we'll see you at many more events. I really appreciate everyone that's turned up, especially other speakers, Stephen and Daryl, especially with Stephen dialing from Singapore, which is always, it's well committed. So what's the time over there at the moment, Stephen?
9 p.m.
9 p.m. Okay. So we're hungry for lunch, or and you're probably, you know, bedtime.
Planted a bottle of wine under his desk.
Yeah, the
This isn't just coffee. No, I'm kidding.
But no, really appreciate that, especially for the time difference as well. And thanks to Holly as well for sending out all the Eventbrites and, you know, the chasers, etc. as well. And all the new people that join, as well as, you know, some regular faces as well. So the next one I'm hoping will be in a couple of months' time, and we probably will do it face to face, whether it be in London, Manchester, or Birmingham. We're just trying to work that one out. So we will send that over to you guys. But I really appreciate everything everyone's done here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.